The cold Montana air bit at my face, but inside the cab of my 1978 International Harvester 3500, I was warm. The familiar rumble of that diesel engine was the only sound in the pre-dawn stillness. I'd rebuilt this machine with my own hands, bolt by bolt, for over 40 years. It wasn't just a bulldozer. It was a part of me. My knuckles were white on the controls. I wasn't looking at the sunrise painting the mountains pink. I was staring at Wyatt's house, that modern two-story eyesore he'd slapped up on the land right next to mine, the land he'd swindled from Old Man Miller's confused widow, the land where my Maggie used to ride her horse. A deep, tired anger settled in my chest, colder than the January frost. This wasn't a decision I'd come to lightly. It was a conclusion. With a grimace that felt like it cracked my weathered face, I engaged the hydraulic lever. The massive, scarred steel blade of the International Harvester lowered with a solid thunk. It hovered just above the pristine snow, aimed at Wyatt's fancy new decorative fence. Spruce, probably. Not even local timber. I didn't gun it. I just pushed the throttle forward steadily. The bulldozer lurched ahead with a growl, a force of pure momentum. The blade met the first fence post. There was no contest. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet morning. Snow, mixed with shredded pine and splinters, erupted in a cloud around me. I kept going, the tracks chewing up the frozen ground beneath the snow. I was through the fence line in seconds, leaving a ragged, ugly scar in the perfect white yard. That's when the front door of the big house flew open. Wyatt stood there, silhouetted in the doorway's yellow light, wrapped in a plush robe. His face was a mask of sleep and utter disbelief. "Clint!" he screamed, his voice high and sharp against the bulldozer's rumble. "What in the hell are you doing? Stop! Stop right now!" I didn't stop. I just sat there in the seat my body had worn smooth over decades, my eyes locked on him from across the ruined fence. The International Harvester idled, puffing diesel smoke into the dawn, a declaration of war written in tread marks and shattered wood. The Montana wind cut right through my jacket as I pulled up to the property 2 days ago. I'd brought Maggie's favorite cherry pie from the diner in town, a surprise. The house looked quiet, but her car was here. My gut started to twist. I didn't knock on the main house door. Something felt off. Instead, I walked around back to the detached garage. The big door was cracked open just enough for a person to slip through. Inside, the air was barely warmer than outside. A single orange glowing space heater whined in the corner, fighting a losing battle. And there she was, my Maggie, sitting on a folding camp cot, wrapped in 2 blankets, her face pale as the snow outside. She was shivering, holding a mug of something that had long gone cold. "Dad?" Her voice was small, swallowed by the empty concrete space. "What are you doing here?" I set the pie box down slowly, my eyes taking in the scene. Her suitcase, a few boxes of books, her winter coat draped over a lawn chair. This wasn't storage. This was where she was living. "Maggie," I said, my own voice tight. "What in God's name is going on? Why are you out here?" She looked down into her mug, and I saw her chin quiver, not from the cold. "Wyatt," she whispered. He said I needed to clear out my clutter from the house. My books, my knitting basket, the photo albums from Mom. He said it was making the place feel crowded. A tear finally broke free, tracing a path down her cheek. He said there was no room in the house for it, so I moved it out here. And then he said there was no room in the house for me and my clutter. Quiet fury. That's what filled me. A hard, cold stone settling in my chest. This was my little girl, the one I taught to change the oil in the old International, the one who'd always had a book tucked under her arm, kicked out into an uninsulated garage in the dead of a Montana winter. I walked over, knelt in front of her, and took her freezing hands in mine. They felt like ice. "How long, honey?" "3 days," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine, full of a shame that had no business being there. "I didn't want to bother you. I thought he'd cool off." I looked around at the concrete walls, the dusty windows, the single pathetic bulb hanging from the ceiling. The space heater's cord looked dangerously thin. I saw red, but my voice stayed quiet, steady. The kind of calm that comes before a storm you know is inevitable. "You're not a bother," I said, squeezing her hands. "You hear me? You're coming with me. Right now." Helping her gather her things, that cold fury in my chest began to forge itself into a plan. Wyatt had crossed a line. He'd forgotten who her father was. And he'd forgotten what I could do with that old bulldozer sitting under a tarp back at my place. The linoleum floor of Wyatt's kitchen was so clean I could see my own reflection in it, a ghost of a man standing in a house that felt like a museum, my daughter's home. And he was standing between me and her. "It's my house, my rules, Clint," Wyatt said, not even looking up from the apple he was methodically slicing. His voice was calm, oily. She needed to learn some independence, a little time to think things over. Every word was a calculated twist of the knife. I could feel my pulse in my temples. "Let her back in the house, Wyatt, right now." He finally glanced at me, a smug, dismissive flick of his eyes. "These are marital issues. Private. You don't get to come in here and stomp around setting boundaries. I'm setting them. She stays out until she apologizes." Apologizes. My Maggie. The image of her sitting alone in my truck, wrapped in a blanket, fueled a fire in my chest that made the pristine white cabinets seem to blur. "It's 40 degrees outside. That's not a boundary. That's cruelty." He placed the knife down with a soft, precise click. "I suggest you leave before this gets unpleasant." "It's already unpleasant," I said, my voice lower, harder than I intended. I took a step forward. The space between us crackled. Wyatt didn't flinch. He just reached for his phone on the sparkling granite countertop. "Last chance. You walk out that door, or I call Sheriff Dalton. You know he'll come, and you'll be the one spending the night in a cell for trespassing and causing a disturbance. How's that going to help Maggie?" He held the phone up, his thumb hovering over the screen. The threat was cold, legal, and perfectly delivered. He'd boxed me in. Standing my ground meant handcuffs. Leaving meant abandoning my girl to his mercy. I looked past him, through the kitchen doorway into the sterile living room. This wasn't a home. It was a cage he'd built, with rules for walls. My fists clenched at my sides, but fighting him here on his terms was exactly what he wanted. It was a battle I couldn't win with words or fists. The sheriff's number glowed on his screen. The smug certainty on Wyatt's face was the final straw. He thought he'd won. "You call him," I said, the words tasting like ash. I took a slow step back toward the door. "You make that call." I turned and walked out, the sound of his contemptuous silence louder than any slamming door. But as I crossed the threshold back into the cold, dark yard, my retreat wasn't surrender. It was a tactical withdrawal. Because I knew something Wyatt, in all his smug superiority, didn't consider. My rules were about to change, and they weren't written in any law book he owned. The hum of the neon vacancy sign outside my motel window was the only sound. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the floral bedspread scratchy under my hands. The confrontation with Wyatt was a live wire in my chest, but anger is a bad fuel. It burns too hot, too fast. I needed something colder, something solid. From the worn leather satchel I'd carried in from the truck, I pulled out the folder. The manila paper was soft at the edges, the color of old newspaper. My property deeds. And beneath them, the land surveys my father had commissioned back when he first bought the parcel next to the creek. I spread them out on the cheap particle board desk, smoothing the creases with a care I usually reserved for the dozer's engine parts. The lamp's weak yellow light fell over the lines and notations, over the precise handwritten measurements from a surveyor long retired, or more likely gone. My finger traced the boundary line, the one Wyatt's new, shiny fence had so blatantly crossed. Right there, in the northeast corner, where the land dips down toward the willow grove. According to this, the creek wasn't just near the property line. For a stretch of about 90 feet, the old creek bed was the property line. Wyatt hadn't just fenced off my access. He'd fenced a piece of land that wasn't his. A slow breath left my lungs, then a smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind you get when a stubborn bolt finally breaks free, when the puzzle piece clicks. This wasn't about yelling anymore. This was about lines on a page that were older than Wyatt, older than his money, older than his arrogance. I studied every notation, every benchmark until my eyes burned. The plan wasn't fully formed, but its foundation was right here in this yellowed paper. I needed official confirmation. I needed the word of the law. The next morning, with the motel coffee bitter on my tongue, I stood by the window, watching the dawn break over the highway. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the county clerk's office I'd looked up the night before. A woman with a tired, efficient voice answered. I gave her the parcel numbers, mine and Wyatt's. I asked my question, simple and direct, about the historical surveys and the creek bed demarcation. I could hear the rustle of pages, the soft click of a computer mouse in the background. "Yes, sir," she finally said, her voice devoid of any drama. "That's correct. The 1952 and 1978 surveys both use the center of the old Sutter Creek bed as the boundary line for that section. It's right here on the plat." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "That's all I needed." I hung up. The solid click of the receiver was the sound of a door locking. The plan wasn't just an idea now. It was a fact, confirmed by the county. Wyatt had stolen more than my piece. He'd stolen land, and I had the papers to prove it. I folded the surveys with a surgeon's precision. The game had just changed. The morning air was cold and sharp as I walked into the county records office, the smell of old paper and floor wax hitting me like a wall. My hands were rough from a lifetime of work, but right now they felt empty, useless. I needed proof. Not a feeling in my gut, but something on paper. The clerk behind the counter was a patient-looking woman with glasses on a chain. "Can I help you, sir?" "I hope so," I said, my voice sounding gravelly even to me. "I need to see the plat map for my land. Parcel 1147 off the old Ridge Road." She nodded, turned to her computer, then disappeared into a back room. She came out with a large, rolled map, the kind that crackles with age. She spread it carefully on a high viewing table, using little weights to hold down the corners. My heart was thumping against my ribs. There it was, the familiar shape of my 40 acres, a square of land I knew every inch of. I traced the bold official line with a calloused finger. Then I pointed to the squiggly pencil line I'd drawn myself decades ago, when Wyatt's father and I were still friends. "This here," I said, my finger resting on the new structure I'd seen from the road. "This new house Wyatt Earp's building. Where does it sit in relation to this?" I tapped the official, inked property line. The clerk leaned in, her eyes following my finger. She took a clear plastic ruler and laid it carefully on the map, aligning it with the grid. She checked the scale, her lips moving silently with numbers. The silence in the office was heavy, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. She looked up at me, her expression neutral, professional. "The legal property line," she said, pointing to the bold ink, "runs right here." Her finger moved to the sketched outline of the house's foundation. "The structure you're indicating appears to be situated approximately 12 feet over the line. Onto this parcel." She tapped my land. "Parcel 1147. A wave of cold, clear certainty washed over me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the solid click of a puzzle piece snapping into place. "So the house is on my land." "Based on this recorded plat, yes, sir. It appears the land in question was never formally subdivided or a deed of sale recorded." She looked at my old friendly pencil mark. "Sometimes these old, informal agreements get lost over the years." Lost. I helped his father build their original cabin. I brought over my dozer to clear the pad. I let them use it. A handshake between neighbors. I never sold an inch. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. The paper didn't lie. Wyatt hadn't just built close to the line. He'd driven his foundation stakes right into the heart of my past and my property. I carefully rolled up my copy of the map, the crackling sound like distant thunder. I had my proof. Now I needed to decide what to do with it. The cold bit through my jacket as I crunched back across the snow-covered yard, the county clerk's official paperwork feeling like a shield in my hand. I'd done it. The property line dispute was settled in black and white. Wyatt's claim was over. Then I saw her. Maggie was standing by the side door of the main house, her shoulders shaking, not from the cold. Her face was flushed, tear tracks cutting through the chill on her cheeks. At her feet, a cardboard box sat half buried in a drift, its contents, some of her old mechanics manuals, a few photos in frames, scattered and dusted with white. My eyes snapped to the garage. My garage, where the 1978 International Harvester 3500 slept. A new heavy-duty padlock gleamed on the hasp, a brutal silver insult against the weathered wood. The door of the house opened then, and Wyatt stepped out onto the porch. He didn't come down the steps. He just leaned against the post, that smug, knowing look plastered on his face. He crossed his arms, watching us. "Daddy," Maggie choked out, wiping her nose with her glove. He came out an hour ago. Changed the lock. Told me to get my junk out of his space." She gestured helplessly at the box in the snow. "He threw it all out here." I looked from my daughter's heartbroken face to the man on the porch. The paperwork in my hand was just paper. It meant nothing to a man like this. Rules, decency, family. None of it meant a thing. Wyatt saw me looking. She had plenty of time to collect her things, he called out, his voice carrying too easily in the still, cold air. Consider yourself evicted from my garage, too. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Then he gave a little smirk. Just for me. A silent reminder that he could always push a little harder, be a little crueler. And that was it. That was the moment. Something inside me, something that had been winding tighter and tighter for years. Every condescending remark, every time he'd made Maggie doubt herself, every inch of my land he'd tried to claim, just snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a final, silent click, like the last tumbler falling in a lock. The cold air I breathed in felt different, sharper. The tears on my daughter's face weren't just sadness anymore. They were evidence. The smug look on Wyatt's face wasn't just irritating. It was a target. I didn't say a word to him. I just looked at Maggie, walked over and started carefully picking her things out of the snow. I placed the photos back in the box, wiped the snow from her manuals. My hands were steady. My mind was clear for the first time in months. All I could see was the garage, and what was inside it. The trigger had been pulled. Now, there was only the path forward. The morning sun was just starting to burn the dew off the tall grass at the ranch. I stood there, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, just looking at it. My 1978 International Harvester 3500. I'd brought this old girl back from the scrap heap myself, decades ago. Every nut, every bolt, every hydraulic line. I knew them like the lines on my own face. Today she wasn't just a piece of machinery. Today she was the judge, jury, and executioner. Wyatt thought a fancy lawyer and some forged paperwork made him a king. He thought bullying an old man and his daughter Maggie was a smart play. He was wrong. He forgot the one thing that truly matters out here, the dirt. My dirt. I spent the morning under the yellow steel, giving her a full service. The familiar smell of diesel and grease was like a meditation. I checked the tracks, topped off the fluids, and listened to that big diesel engine rumble to life with a sound that felt like truth. It wasn't anger fueling me. It was a cold, clear certainty. This was the only language a man like Wyatt would understand. Finally, I reached into the cab of my old pickup and pulled out the manila folder. Inside was every scrap of paper that proved this land was mine. The original deed, the surveys, the lot maps. The truth, in triplicate. I didn't slam the folder down. I placed it carefully, respectfully, on the worn leather seat of the Bulldozer. That paperwork was my witness. It was going to watch everything. My plan was simple, legal, and brutal. I wasn't going to touch Wyatt's house. That would be crossing a line. No. I was going to remove every single improvement he'd dared to put on my land without my permission. The 6-foot spite fence he'd erected 10 feet over my property line? Gone. The septic line he'd trenched through my west pasture to service his new guest house? Severed. The fancy paved driveway apron that now spilled onto my grass? Reduced to gravel and dust. I was reclaiming what was mine, inch by inch. I climbed up into the dozer's cab, the folder crackling under me. I looked out over my land, toward the line where Wyatt's arrogance met my heritage. The blade was already lowered. Today, the bulldozer wasn't for building. It was for unbuilding. It was for setting the record straight, in the most permanent way I knew how. I took a deep breath, put my hands on the controls, and let the diesel's roar say what words never could. It was time to go to work. The red and blue lights painted the pines in frantic strokes as the sheriff's cruiser crunched to a halt on the gravel road. I kept my hands steady on the controls, the 3,500's diesel engine thrumming a low, patient song beneath me. I watched in the rearview mirror as Wyatt erupted from the passenger side, a wild man pointing a trembling finger at me, and the dozer blade currently buried in the earth, severing the illegal utility line he'd thought was so cleverly hidden. "He's insane! Arrest him! He's destroying property!" Wyatt's voice was a shrill crack in the afternoon air. I took a deep, slow breath, the smell of upturned soil and diesel smoke filling my lungs. This was it. With deliberate calm, I pulled the throttle back, letting the big International Harvester's engine sigh into silence. The sudden quiet was louder than the noise had been. I climbed down, my boots landing firmly on my own dirt. The sheriff, an older man named Walsh, who'd bought Fred's old place, approached with a measured pace, his eyes missing nothing. Wyatt was practically dancing with rage beside him.
"Afternoon, Sheriff," I said, my voice thankfully steady. I didn't look at Wyatt. I reached into my chest pocket and pulled out the folded, weathered papers, the original land deeds, with the boundaries my grandfather had surveyed himself. "Just removing trespassing structures from my land, Sheriff," I said, handing them over. Sheriff Walsh took them, giving me a slow nod. He unfolded the papers, his eyes tracing the familiar lines in the notary seals that were older than he was. The silence stretched, broken only by the whisper of the pines and the low murmur of a crowd. I finally glanced past him. Neighbors had gathered at the edge of the tree line. Maggie was there, her arms crossed, a solid, proud figure beside Old Man Thompson from down the road. They'd all heard the commotion. Wyatt couldn't stand it. "He's got a bulldozer. Look at it. That's my water line." The sheriff finished reading, carefully refolded the deeds, and handed them back to me. Then he turned to Wyatt, and his genial face settled into a stern official frown. "He's got the title, son, clear as day. This parcel, and a good 50 feet past where you dug that trench, is the Easton family land." He hooked his thumbs in his belt. "You buildin' without a permit on land you don't own. That's a civil matter, not a criminal one." The look on Wyatt's face, the sheer deflating shock, was something I'll remember forever. The bluster leaked out of him like air from a punctured tire. The gathered neighbors' whispers grew a little louder, less uncertain. They weren't looking at the crazy old man with a bulldozer anymore. They were looking at a fool who tried to steal a piece of a legacy. Sheriff Walsh tipped his hat to me. "You'll want to get a surveyor out here, Clint. Mark the line proper once you're done. Keep it civil." It was a warning to both of us, but his eyes were on Wyatt. I just nodded, folding the deeds back into my pocket. The weight of them was gone. The truth was out there now for everyone to see, as plain as the fresh scar in the earth left by my dozer. My dozer on my land. The silence in my workshop was broken by the sound of a truck door slamming. I looked up from the oil pan of the 3,500 to see Wyatt's pickup kicking up dust on my driveway. But this time, it wasn't the slow, arrogant crawl I'd come to know. It was a frantic stop. He got out, and I barely recognized him. The smug, entitled posture was gone, replaced by a slumped desperation. His face was pale. He didn't march up to me. He almost shuffled. "Clint," he said, his voice thin, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a rag, saying nothing. I just waited. Maggie had called me an hour ago, her voice a mix of awe and relief, telling me the sheriff had just left their place. Wyatt's eyes darted around landing on the bulldozer, then skittering away as if it burned him. The permits for the house. They're saying they're no good. The foundation's over the line. He was spitting the words out like they were poison. And the water, the power, they just shut it off. I nodded slowly, leaning against the massive tire of the International Harvester. Survey don't lie, Wyatt. You built on my land. That well and that transformer, they service my property, my workshop. He flinched at the word my. It was a word he'd tried to steal. The sheriff, he choked out, he said I should work it out with my father-in-law. There it was, the final, complete unraveling, not by a threat, not by a show of force, but by the quiet, immovable facts of law and ownership. All the bluster, all the bullying he'd used on Maggie, it was useless here. He was exposed, legally and in front of the whole community. I'd made sure of that, having quiet conversations with folks at the diner and the feed store for weeks. The story of what he'd done, what he'd tried to take, was already spreading faster than a summer wildfire. I saw the exact moment the full weight of it crushed him. His shoulders collapsed. The panicked gleam in his eyes dulled into a hollow defeat. He wasn't facing a furious old man with a wrench. He was facing the consequences of his own greed, and there was no one to fight. "You played by your rules, Wyatt," I said, my voice calm and low in the afternoon quiet. "I just made sure the game was on my field." He had no retort, no sneer. He just stared at the dirt, utterly destroyed, not by fists, but by a patience he never understood, and a legacy, this land, this machine, my family, he could never touch. He turned without another word, got in his truck, and left. The dust he drove away in seemed to settle over the peace he'd tried so hard to break. It was over. The last of the sun's fire bled out over the Montana ridgeline, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. I sat on my porch, the old wooden planks creaking softly under my chair, a warm mug of coffee cradled in my hands. The air was clean and cold, the kind that makes you feel alive. A week. That's all it had been. It felt like a lifetime, and it felt like a single, long breath finally released. Wyatt was gone, packed his bitterness into a rented truck, and left for some city where his sharp edges couldn't cut into this land any more. The silence he left behind wasn't empty, it was peaceful. It was the sound of the wind in the pines, and nothing else. My gaze drifted from the sunset to the silhouette against the barn. My 1978 International Harvester 3500. I'd given her a proper bath this afternoon, hosing off every last speck of the drama. The evening light glinted off her clean red metal. She wasn't a weapon tonight. She was just what she'd always been, a promise kept, a piece of my history parked and quiet. Her work done, my real victory was warmer. Through the kitchen window of the main house, I could see the soft golden glow of the lights Maggie had turned on. She was in there, probably unpacking the last of her books, making the space her own, starting fresh. She was safe. That heavy, cold knot of fear I'd carried for months was just gone, unraveled by a bulldozer's roar and a daughter's courage. I took a slow sip of coffee. The bitterness was just right. This land, every acre rolling out into the gathering dusk, was mine again, not just on a deed, but in my spirit. The fight had carved the truth deep into me. Some things are worth the noise, worth the stand. The stars began to prick through the darkening velvet overhead. A coyote yipped far in the distance. a lonesome sound that only emphasized the quiet contentment right here. No more scheming, no more threats on the wind, just the land, the machine, and the people I loved, all under the same wide sky. I drained the last of my coffee, the warmth settling deep. The villain was gone. My daughter was safe. The land was mine. It was enough. It was everything. I sat there in the quiet dark, perfectly, finally, at peace.